Well, we're out here today talking about buck positioned movement based on food source and where the food source as it relates to where bucks are going to bed, where they're going to move, and where you potentially hang a couple stands. And I'm on a client property here in Minnesota. Beautiful day. Brought the binoculars. We're looking, we were hoping to shed hunt a little bit, but with the snow today, it's going to make it more difficult. We had some old snow, and it's amazing how those antlers are just a little bit yellow almost compared to the snow stick out. But real important topic, because if you don't have these conditions, you're not going to have buck movement, daylight buck movement on your land. And so we've tried to use a drone to illustrate a couple of these locations. On the client design, I'm going to show you a few more and why the client is seeing bucks in these locations. And we're going to talk about how we're maximizing the space on this property too. And so this is our first stop. We're going to show you two of these setups. If you can see behind me, I'll just explain where the stands, everything. I'm standing where a water hole is going to go, right here. There's a stand behind me over my left shoulder. There's a pink ribbon back there. A lot of times on client properties when we're locating stand locations, if a client likes to mark those, we'll put the knot the way the stand should be facing for left-handed, right-handed shooter. And then behind the camera, we have a great spot for a mock scrape. So this is all set up here for movement. And there's already movement, deer trails here anyways, but we're in a location where we can get daylight buck movement for a variety of reasons. For one, food is about 150 yards that way, and it's behind a huge bank of switchgrass. In fact, the food is going to be greatly expanded and it's going to be pushed to the east even further, which I'm west of that food plot. It's going to be further away from us. So a big food source. On top of that, we have a giant patch of switchgrass out here. There's a lot of switchgrass planted out here. I'd say at least 10 to 12 acres. And we're going to be putting some diversity pockets in those. Diversity pockets meaning we want something other than grass. We don't care if there's forbs and forages growing in there with a combination of broadleaf weeds, shrubs, hardwood regeneration, whatever you can get to grow in there that would have some type of browse value so that we can diversify those pockets. And I have another video, I have several other videos about this. Why just switch? Because if you add big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, that's the grass that lays down in the winter. Don't let anyone tell you different. And then on top of that, more grass is not diversity. Don't let anyone tell you that more grass is diversity. It's all just more grass. That's like saying a stand of red pine, white pine, jack pine is diversity. No, it's just more pine. If you had white spruce, Norway spruce, add some pine and red pine into a white pine, red pine, it's not just diversity, it's more conifer. So I hope that makes sense. More grass, more grass varieties, just more grass as deer relate to it, wildlife relate to it. So true diversity takes when you take that switchgrass out there and at 40 to 50%, you're putting diversity pockets in it to total that entire space. Let's say it's 10 acres, you're putting 4 or 5 acres of pockets of diversity. I let the size of the area determine the size of the pocket. For example, if it's 10 acres or less, then you might have 1/16 of an acre pockets on up to a 1/4 acre, half acre at best. Largest size. And if you're looking at 15 acre to 40 acre pockets, giant switchgrass plantings, you could go up to an acre in size, 3/4 of an acre, half acre. Bottom line, it has to be hidden by the switch, and that's why those pockets are inside. You want thick switch. Don't let anyone tell you that 5 to 6 pounds for bedding is the way to go. You want 8 to 10 pounds because the switch, deer don't like to necessarily bed inside the switch. They like to bed on the edge of the switch. And so you're giving them 8 to 10 pounds per acre. So it is very thick, and that's hiding those diversity pockets within. And think of all the early successional growth plants, trees, shrubs you could have growing in those diversity pockets, and then you have the switch to flank it and protect it and stand up all winter long. That's diversity. That's where you get lots of different species in one spot. We have the switch out there. We have the food. We have the tree line right here. Because the food is 150 yards away, before this was just all ag field. It came right up to really, Dylan's at the camera right there, and behind the camera, 20 yards away is where that ag field started. That meant that when we were right here, this is that almost staging area where deer would come out of the timber behind us, they'd hold here and then go out to the ag fields right at dark. Now we're pulled in that food position, a lot stronger position, something that can last all season long. We're putting that 150 yards away from here. So what does that do with that 150 yards of space? That creates doe bedding. When you create those pockets out there, that brings does that would be bedding on this edge next to their food source. It takes them and puts them 150 yards out in the field. And that gives us, by the time we come all the way back here into this movement, this is truly daylight buck movement, and that's why we put a stand in this location. We can see this similar On this property right here, it's about 320 acres. We can see this pattern develop not only here, but even on the 30 acres of land that I hunt that we shot the 5 bucks off of this year down by Coon Valley where I live. We see that once you get back to that 300 yards away, it's buck bedding. Once you get to 150 to 200 yards away, it's daylight buck movement. And the landowner has seen this, designed this property in 2017. He's seen this over and over again. Now it's factory shot his 2 bucks. This year he only hunted about 5 hours. So he got his bucks pretty quick, and that's what an efficient plan could do. I told him next year you might want to wait a little bit longer because he had some big giants come in after that. He shot some real nice bucks, but man, there are some spectacular ones, and he's going to even have more of those this year. We're back in that area where you can actually now have daylight buck movement, and you can count on it. I call this stand location a 40% sit, meaning if he waits till morning during late October, early November when it's very cold and in the 20s, just had that temperature drop like I teach. He has a hollow to the north here and a hollow to the south. He can blow his wind off either side in the morning with north winds or south winds. He can get a lot of wind variety. And when he comes back to this location, for one, he's not walking through food. He's walking right down the power line here that extends over to his house. He can come right in from the power line. He can come into this location. He can get back here during the morning hours where those bucks and does are out around the food sources somewhere. In fact, he has ag extending off his land. So a lot of times you come into a location like this, you're not even seeing deer till an hour past daylight because it takes them that long to get back to this location. But we're right in that buck wheelhouse now that we have all this cover extending out into the field. Without that cover, we have no buck bedding. And we're going to show you another spot. Again, the stand's going to go right back here. It's going to have the water hole, mock scrape. It's going to be a perfect location, especially for that morning hunt. Then we're going to show you another spot that's similar. We have some hinge cuts over there in the bedding area. We're going to come in from the back side. We'll show you how that works. And kind of like this, you're coming into the back side of that movement, into the side of the movement. Great daylight movement. And this landowner is going to be really happy with this spot. And the cool thing is he can stick an Exodus render trail camera on this right here, cell camera, and he can watch it from his house. He can watch it from that cell camera and see when that activity picks up and when he sees the mature buck that he wants, and that's back here, whether by sign or by trail camera, it's time to hunt. We're going to show you another one of these setups too, which I think is pretty cool. Well, this is that second really cool buck movement area dictated by food. Right here where the camera's at, we have 1-year-old switchgrass growing. In fact, the landowner didn't like the level of weed growth in here. I thought it was fine, but he mowed it, burned it, and it's starting again. And I would advise him to keep it because that switchgrass behind me is only 2 years old, and this stuff right here will explode. It's going to be just like the switchgrass behind me. It'll be 6 foot tall, extremely thick. We're moving that food plot out here, and that's big and spreading this way. And then we have the switchgrass. You can see some of the diversity pockets starting behind me because we want to bring doe bedding out into this field. And then there's hinge cut bedding area right behind that Ross Fernandez, my partner with WHS Turnkey, he was out here. He's going to be back here working on this client property in Minnesota this year too, and creating more cuttings. So we have food source, heavy switchgrass, diversity pockets to start the doe bedding and to start the bedding in general. Then we have hinge cuts, and then we're putting the stand location on the back side of those hinge cuts. Not that much different than what we had going on in the other location where we had a lot of switchgrass, 150 yards from the food. And then we had a wood line. And then once we got back in those wood line, we were flanked by hinge cuttings, and that created great buck movement area for during the day. We don't really care if these bucks are staging up right here, 5 minutes before dark, because it's almost impossible to get in the staging area because a true staging area has doe bedding in it. And if there's doe bedding, it's almost impossible to access. And if you access it and you bump those does, guess what? No buck bedding and no good hunting spot. So you need to allow that staging area to take place every single day. And if you're spooking it out, it's no good. It's not only no good for that stand location, but probably not the property in general. Certainly not the movement, certainly not the buck bedding. So we're creating that buck bedding in the back. And so if you kind of see a familiar scenario with all the buck bedding spots, the current buck bedding hot spots that the landowner has really honed in on over the last couple of years, they're about 150 yards to 200 yards off of good food sources, good quality food sources. Used to be ag extending all the way to that field, all the way to the wood line. And so by the time that ag extended all the way to the wood line, and the wood line's only 150 yards from the road beyond that, and then the neighbor's property is on the other side of that, then it really created a situation where even though you had all this space out here because of the ag field, the deer were literally getting, especially in the form of mature bucks, getting pushed right off the property because they didn't have enough depth. So we're increasing that depth by about 150 yards. That gives us a 300-yard depth. That means we can actually come off the road now, move in 100 yards, get into a stand location, come in from the backside here in this location, coming off the road, or coming from the house and over the power line in the other location, and we multiply that by 5 or 6 spots out here, and there's 5 or 6 solid areas where you can count on the oldest bucks in the neighborhood living, and those bucks can relate to the doe movement. They can relate to the food sources that the landowner spread out here within the design, and it's really created a separation from mature bucks, but not only the mature bucks and the different buck bedding habitats they have and how you can hunt them, but it's also created little micro movements of doe and doe family groups where they can consistently hit food sources that are lasting all season long, and they do not have that competition factor from other doe family groups or other matriarchs or dominant does. All those does can self-align by dominance. They can stay in those bedding areas and food sources all season long, and when that happens, you create that depth. Then those mature bucks will relate to each one of those little micro movements. They love to slot in and be in close proximity to other movements during the daylight hours, and then after dark, who cares where they go? Those bucks can have a 3-mile home range, but you have to have these conditions set up. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take you indoors, and I'm going to show you this property plan, and I'm going to circle some of those buck bedding areas, and you can look at them paper. We're trying to show you with the drone. We're trying to show you out here how everything lays in, and we're going to point out some stand locations in these 2 spots, but I'm going to point out some other ones on the drawing. We'll wrap it up with that drawing, and hopefully you can understand how. And I'll show you, without this depth out here created by the switchgrass and getting rid of some of this ag, you wouldn't have these buck bedding areas. We'd push them off to the neighbors because those bucks around here are going to require that 200 to 300 yards of depth. So if you don't have that food, that consistent food, for one, you're not going to establish a consistent doe movement. If you don't have that food and consistent doe movement, you're not going to have those bucks. You're not going to have that daylight cruising opportunity and daylight hunting stand locations. And I can't wait to show you this on the drawing, because I really want this to make sense to you, because this is a concept of mine in this buck bed layering that I've written about for almost 2 decades, and it works. Put it on a lot of different properties every year. And this landowner here, he only sat like 5 times in 5 hours total and shot his 2 bucks last year. And I'm going to have him wait longer, I hope, next year, because there's some monsters on this property. We're going to show you a few of those locations where you might connect with one this fall. Now, I hope you enjoyed the in-the-field view and the aerial photos, the drone footage of those 2 really good buck movement areas, daylight buck movement areas, and why they're created. And I wanted to kind of show you on the client drawing here. And this was the first area where we were at. And I'll circle this right here. This is the whole system. And where we were standing, where we're filming, is right back in this corner. You can see the power line coming right up through here. See that open, and I'll even draw that in there coming from the house. It's coming right through there. And so we were at right here, stand number 1, in that location. Now before, in this location, you know, as I was talking about, we had the wood line, we have the yellow and switchgrass, and then we had the food right here. Well, before, that food line was actually right here, you know, along this edge, because this was all ag in this area in the yellow. Now we put that yellow area there, and this is extended that location about 100 to 125 yards off the field edge. What that did is it allowed to create a greater amount of depth. So the client, his next step is to create these diversity pockets. The diversity pockets are going to be placed in here, 1/16 of an acre, 1/4 acre, and that's going to allow that woody browse, shrubs, hardwood regeneration, broadleafs, clover, alfalfa, whatever comes in the form of forage, and basically daytime browse is going to allow it to come into that yellow area, in that switchgrass area. It's going to take does that were bedding previously inside the woods, in here, and it's going to stick them out into these locations. So we'll take does out here, put them in here, put them into here, and what that does is it fills this space right here with does and along the edge, and that creates where this stand location is right here, number 1. that creates that opportunity for buck movement, because we're taking potential bedding that used to be back in this entire area and sometimes off the boundary. You can see the black line is the boundary. We're putting those does out in here, and that puts that movement right here into this location. Now I'll go over location number 2. Location number 2, you're going to see around this field edge, it's the same theme. He still has ag out here, but we're adding a lot of switchgrass. This number 6 stand location, but this system right here. Again, food on the outside, then switchgrass, then hinge cut bedding area, and finally stand location right here. We're shooting the video from about right here in this location. And that creates, on this video, stand location number 2 back here. So 1 and 2. And again, it's created because if this ag field was here, then you have to jam does back into this area. It's a steep bluff where no deer are bedding. And then it's the road down here and big open timber on the neighbors. Open field right here. So what that does is it creates a situation, if the ag field is right here, even if the deer are coming out into that ag every single day, which they are typically not, because if they've harvested the beans, if the corn's been picked, if the field's been plowed, then by the time you get into November and December, there's no food source out there. And even then, just a scattered, big, broad bean field or corn field is not a high quality food source, because it doesn't define deer movement to a specific location and hold deer all season long with a level of diversity. It's just corn or it's just beans. So by having a green food source strip out here where you have late planted peas, beans, oats, layered with rye, and on the other side a brassica crop, then the client here can have a situation where he's actually drawing deer by that food all day or all season long. And then when that happens, you have the switchgrass out here. We're adding more diversity pockets within that switchgrass out in these locations. Diversity pockets out here. You're pulling does from, again, from the inside of the cover. We're sticking does into here on the edge of the woods, into the switchgrass, taking them up here, and then that frees locations for areas to hunt bucks at the back side of these bedding areas. And then also, what's really cool about that is then we have evening stand locations out here where we can take advantage of bucks in the afternoon that are here in this location, because we've maximized that depth and put that cover out into the field in the form of diversity pockets, switchgrass, and food plots. All that doesn't take place unless we bring that out in the field, unless we add the switchgrass, unless we add the food plots. And if you go around the property, you can start to see these similar features in this location right here. There's actually good buck bedding taking place in this location right here. This location right here, and we're actually improving this location too. So there's 7 solid locations where we can expect enough depth on this property where you actually have doe family groups up near the food, switchgrass opportunity for bedding with diversity pockets, edge. The orange is all in hinge cut, and then on the back side of that you have morning locations for bucks, you have evening locations to hunt bucks as they're heading to food, and there's many locations. And what I find, typically is if you have 7 areas like here, each one of these features doe family groups, mature buck movement, and then you have the small satellite bucks hanging around. And it might be that you have a 4 or 5 year old buck to get shot, and a new 4 or 5 year old buck takes its place. And so what I see is you don't necessarily have 7 mature bucks in those locations every year, but you typically have 4, 5, or 6. And it's a fluid movement too. You have bucks that might move in the end of October and they stay till January. You have some that move in November and they stay till December. And you might have some that are in September and they're there all the way till the end of the year. But you're looking at a part-time buck herd. They're relating to this food source, they're relating to fall cover. They're relating to these doe movements that are consistent because the food's consistent. You're not spooking out the bedding areas or the food source. And so because of that, you can pack a lot of mature bucks into a small area, and you can expect them to stay there the entire hunting season if the conditions stay the same. So we've gone over a couple of those stand locations and what they look like. what they look like from the outside, what they look like from the drone, and what it takes to build those. Again, without creating that depth out into the ag fields and taking over some of that ag field, those positions do not take place, those setups don't take place. And this is how you use food on a property like this, or your property, to dictate where bucks are bedding. You have to have that depth. And by the way, this works on public land too. So if you have those major food sources, clear cuts, big greenbrier tops, a stand of white oaks in September, you look for those layers where here's where definitely does are bedding and then those bucks are bedding behind, and you fit it in just like this, whether it's private land or public land. It's the same concept on either. It's original concept of mine of layering bedding areas. And I hope this makes sense, because you can make this work on your land. Don't let anyone tell you that you can only have X number of mature bucks per square mile. That's just hogwash. Less than 5% of all parcels attract the daylight attention of mature bucks, and there's a reason why. They don't have that consistency of food source. They don't have the consistency of safe cover. They don't have the travel in between, and hunters don't allow that to take place for the entire season. Food plots are critical on private land, because there's enough quality food sources around that if you don't have food plots, you can't just build a property on cover. You can't build a property on just apples or soft mass or crab apples, persimmon trees. You have to have a daily food source that lasts from September into January. And unfortunately, those mass crops cannot do that in high volume in large locations to satisfy the needs of deer around a parcel. This is how you do it. This is how you put those food position buck bedding, and you allow those daylight movements to take place. And I hope this makes sense. We're really this year trying to offer a lot of diagrams, a lot of illustrations, drone footage to really help you, the viewer, understand these situations. These are the tactics I've been teaching since '05 when I started my consultation business, and my 700 articles, 450 videos as of right now. My web series that's coming up, I try to really teach these concepts. They've been working for a very long time, and I hope you can take advantage of them. Whether you ever hire me, buy a book or anything, I try to put all this content out for free for you, the viewer. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you can take advantage of it this year. And most of all, I hope you have a great hunt and a great herd this fall.